Well, I gotta say, today certainly didn't turn out the way I thought it might when I hit the hay last night. Only managed about 4 or 5 hours of sleep on that crappy, worn-out mattress I found inside this unused camper. When I woke, I had a thought, as I looked out over the town. What if word of my killing Joe Cobb reached the Powder Gangers' leadership? I'd gathered through talking to the various folks in town that these chain gangsters were plentiful, and that there was some kind of NCR prison to the east where they're all coming from. And with the sun still down, I got a wild idea in my head. The kind of idea I don't think I would have got before I got a bullet in the brain. So, I grabbed the Powder Ganger outfit that Cobb had been wearing, which I had liberated him of in case it would be useful as armor in this upcoming fight, and squeezed into it. It was a bit of a loose fit, but that's why the good Lord invented belts, for tactical stealth missions. I hear that Jesus was one crazy son of a bitch. Anyway, about halfway down the road out of Goodsprings, I realized nobody had actually seen me kill Cobb, which means nobody could tie me to the murder, but I'd already planned out my little sneaky mission and decided that infiltrating a group of convicts, while needlessly dangerous and probably stupid, would also prove a perfect opportunity to get my hands on plenty of good supplies that nobody will come looking for. Or at least nobody that I couldn't kill without pissing off the NCR authorities around these parts. Amazingly, Cobb's outfit allowed me to blend in with the cover of darkness on my side. Though the sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, it was still dark enough for me to bypass 2 other Powder Ganger patrols who wearily let me pass after a quick look at me in the NCRCF digs. Good thing it wasn't in the middle of the day, because I imagine they would have figured it out pretty quick that I wasn't one of their fellow convicts if they got a good look at my face. Guess these guys were never taught to be that suspicious. I made it to the prison by around 7 in the morning, just after the sun had come out, and since I didn't spot any patrols heading up the road towards Goodsprings as I arrived, I figured the town was still safe, for now. Before actually heading up to the main gate though, I decided to ditch the Powder Ganger disguise, since whoever they had on guard duty was probably aware of who was and wasn't an actual convict. I really think that bullet messed me up something fierce, because once I was ready, I just strolled on up to the gate with at least 3 armed guards watching me from towers surrounding the prison yard. Somehow they didn't shoot me, and I walked right up to the door guy and asked him if he'd let me in. Maybe impressed at the brazenness of my approach, he agreed to let me in if I paid him 100 caps, which I luckily had thanks to some trading I'd done with Chet back in Goodsprings. Just like that, I was in the hornet's nest. That's when things got supremely strange. One of the first bruisers who eyes me as I walk into the reception building pulls me aside and says that he speaks for the gang, and that they know what I've done recently, and they don't yet consider me an enemy, but they're watching me and won't hesitate to gut me should they determine that I am, in fact, their enemy. Well, I have no idea how, but I can only assume that what the fella meant was that they knew I killed Cobb and were just warning me to not overplay my hand, lest I end up dead in a ditch behind the correctional facility. I also ended up sitting and having a chat with a man in there who didn't seem to be directly aligned with the raiding activities the rest of the outfit was participating in, but he knew that he couldn't just rightly stroll back into NCR territory without expecting a bit of old-fashioned frontier justice. This guy, Myers he says his name was, used to be a sheriff out west somewhere, but got a bit too carried away a few too many times when speeding along the judicial process, and it got me thinking, maybe not everybody in this place is necessarily a threat. Could be a decent number of folks in here who had no interest in raiding to survive, but had nowhere else to go. I had to speak to whoever was in charge of the prison as soon as I could, maybe try and talk him down from attacking Goodsprings if Cobb's group isn't a breakaway after all. Myers told me a little bit about the riot that saw all the prisoners take the place for themselves, and mentioned how the original ringleader, a guy by the name of Samuel Cook, left shortly after the takeover with most of, or at least a whole lot of the prisoners, and the guy he left in charge, or who took over after Cook vamoosed, is a guy named Eddie. Turns out, Eddie is a simple, straightforward man, the kind of guy I have no doubt would break my neck if I gave him good reason to, but who more than anything just wants things taken care of competently and quickly, knowing just how precarious their position is with the NCR just up the road as close as Prim, so I've heard. I offered to help Eddie out with whatever he needed done, hoping to ingratiate myself a little further into the group and get a better idea what their plans were. Lucky for me, all Eddie needed done was settling a little bit of internal disputes and a bit of espionage, which gave me the perfect opportunity to cautiously learn as much as I could. First, he had me take out a group who had split off from the main prison detachment, or at least their leader, a guy named Chavez. At this point, I'd already killed at least one Powder Ganger without knowing a whole lot about him, other than that he was prepared to use violence to get whatever he wanted. I figured killing a bunch more of these bastards was only likely to make things easier for somebody else out there who'd be spared their savage and explosive attacks along the road. Chavez wasn't very hard to find. Him and his buddies were camped along the train tracks just south of the prison. A couple of rounds from my trusty new varmint rifle from atop a nearby hill, and his boys scattered like Brahmins spooked by a nightkin. I ended up taking out the rest of his gang too. Didn't really have to, but I think I might be getting a little bit trigger happy. Can't believe I never fired a gun before 2 days ago. I really am a goddamn natural. And I think I might be going a bit crazy. Swung back to Eddie and let him know that Chavez was out of the picture, and he immediately sends me back to investigate some traitor poking around Powderganger territory up near Gjeggi, just southeast of Goodsprings. When I find the guy, he pretty quickly gives himself away, as some bounty hunter was hoping to make a few bucks bringing in one of the gangers. The weird part is, though, there ain't even a bounty out on any individual members as far as I can tell. Breakout only happened less than a week ago or something, and I think the NCR ain't got around to it yet. This crazy bastard just thought he'd take the initiative, in his own words. Well, from one crazy bastard to another, I let the guy know that his ruse wouldn't work for much longer. Told him to get the heck out of here before the next guy that shows up with a loaded rifle first, and questions never. As it turned to head back to the prison, though, I kept my ear to the wind to see if I could hear any gunshots coming up from Goodsprings way. If that detachment led by Cobb really is going to make a run at the town, I'm sure I'd be able to hear the commotion even from this far away, and so for today anyway, I ain't heard a goddamn peep, so I figured they must be alright, and headed back one more time. Then finally, Eddie gave me the task of heading into Prim to try and find out if the NCR deployed there had any intentions of attempting to retake the prison anytime soon, which was mighty convenient since I was planning to do that anyways, after I left, regardless of what Eddie tasked me with. Though I definitely don't think we had the same idea for the same reason. It was getting late into the afternoon by that time. I hugged the side of the I-15 heading south towards Prim and kept my eyes peeled for any more chain gangsters who didn't already know about my newly formed and precariously balanced alliance. Good thing too, since when I finally did make it to Prim near that big old pre-war train ride behind the Bison Steve, I noticed a bunch of what looked like powder gangers spread all over the town, including some up on the elevated tracks. About 10 seconds later, I almost got my second bullet to the brain in as many weeks. Whether or not this group was still directly allied with the prison but didn't know of my involvement, or whether they just didn't care, I had to take down 2 more as I rounded the perimeter, trying to find a good way to sneak inside. Didn't end up finding anything. Place is near impenetrable when you got nothing in the way of gear, and you approach from any direction but the mountains to the east, and it was too late for that. I ended up getting stopped by an NCR soldier who apparently didn't see me already kill 2 convicts, and was trying to tell me to stay out of the town since it's become overrun. Yeah, I'd already figured out that much, thanks jackass. Once I finally got to the western side of town and ever so carefully crossed the half section of bridge still connecting the 2 sides without triggering the mines I assume the NCR themselves laid down, I went about trying to find some actual citizens. I had been to Prim once or twice before taking the job coordinated out of the local office, which ended up almost being the death of me, but I had no idea just what quality of folk were around these parts. I had never done much more than stay a few nights at the Bison Steve and get pissed drunk at the V&B across the way, so that's where I started my search. Luckily, first guy I ran into seemed to have the run of things, holding down the folks huddled into the casino to keep away from the powder gangers. This guy seemed pretty sure that the NCR was planning to retake the prison any day now, but seeing as this day was already just about over, I figured I should be able to squeeze in at least one more sleep before trying to lend a hand at eliminating this chain gang threat along this stretch of the I-15 for good. By then, I realized I hadn't checked on Goodsprings in a while, and I still had no actual confirmation as to whether or not Joe Cobb's gang was still directly affiliated with the prison anymore, so I decided to take the knowledge I'd gained and the ammo I'd picked up off those convicts and head back to Goodsprings before the sun crept away for the night. So it was one more trip spent listening to one of those radio stations that this fancy Pip-Boy picks up, Radio New Vegas, and I got back to town around 8 in the evening. Something seemed a bit off when I got back to town though, a bit ominous, and I had no real idea why. I headed back to see if Ringo was still at the El Dorado gas station near Doc Mitchell's, and sure enough he was, so I breathed a quick sigh of relief that all my meandering during the day hadn't cost me a chance to take down the rest of Cobb's sorry outfit. I let Ringo know about the little militia that I'd rounded up, and just as I was about to head back to my trailer and try to retire for the night, Sonny burst inside the gas station saying the powder gangers were here to play. Bastards must have followed me into town or something, because they were more than halfway up the road by the time we all spilled out the door and tried to make it to more defensible positions. Sonny had given Ringo and I both a handful of dynamite sticks that Easy Pete had come through for us with, and the 2 of them took up nearby the saloon while I tried to cut right through the Brahmin pens in the middle of town to catch them off from the side. I'd never used dynamite in battle before. Hell, I'd never been in a situation you could rightly call an outright battle before in my entire life, but just like shooting that varmint rifle, it seemed to all come naturally when the chips were down. When the dust settled, all the powder gangers were dead, and not one citizen of Goodsprings by my count had been killed or even seriously injured. Which is probably why Ringo was so enthusiastic when he handed me a payment that he'd already swore he wouldn't even be able to pay, taking directly out of his employers, the Crimson Caravan Company's funds, and telling me to drop in on him sometime if I'm ever up near the company's headquarters east of Freeside. Sun had just finished setting too, and the whole day seemed to wrap itself up nicely with a shiny, blood-red bow, so I took the opportunity to have a few drinks at the Prospector before finally turning in for the night at the same trailer I'd slept in last night. As I have finished dictating this, I wonder, will the days just keep on getting crazier from here on out like they have been? Only time will tell, I guess, but I got a good feeling about tomorrow. So for the second day, I ended up doing something a bit odd, but it's something that I've done plenty in my actual normal playthroughs that I don't record, so you're just going to have to accept it. I mean, realistically, I could have just not told you, but that's not really my style. So basically, I started the day and did the Ghost Town gunfight early in the morning, as it felt appropriately cinematic. Whole fight went really well too, but about an hour into my in-game day, I realized something. By vilifying myself with the powder gangers, I'm locked out of doing the quests at NCRCF, including the raid to retake it with the NCR detachment stationed near Prim during the quest I fought the law. So, as you can see here, I was having a bit of a crisis, and eventually I decided to just straight up restart the day and avoid Ghost Town gunfight until I'd already set up the things necessary to complete I Fought the Law. So during my second attempt at day 2, I woke up much earlier, like 4 a.m., and came up with a narrative in my head that justified my character beelining it for the prison, which you heard in the logbook section there. I didn't actually need to use the powder ganger disguise to get past the patrols now, since killing Joe Cobb alone isn't enough to make them hostile, and I was able to just walk up right to the prison, only switching back to my normal clothes for, again, story reasons. Talked to Myers, did a bit more wandering, and then headed up to talk to Eddie and start the disappointingly short powder ganger side quests, or at least the main ones. This meant first dealing with the powder ganger splinter group led by Chavez just south of the prison, which didn't go quite as cinematically as I'd hoped, but I still ended up with all of them being very dead, so. Then I had to deal with the traitor outside of Gene's skydiving, who I would normally use speech checks on, but for once, my character isn't going hard in on speech, so I just had to use regular old intelligence checks to convince him to get the hell out of here. My character is slowly going a bit crazy and becoming more and more comfortable with needless murder, but he wasn't quite at the point of killing innocent people yet, so. After that, I get sent to Prim, and since I already know the place is going to be crawling with convicts, I make the stupid decision to try and use the methods that I've used in my modded playthroughs, and completely forgot that for the first time in a decade, I actually have to contend with all of the annoying invisible walls, and thus, I cannot get into Prim from the east side by Bethesdaing my way up the mountainside, as I've done many times in the past. Instead, I get into a fight with a couple of the convicts from this side of the gate, and eventually make my way all the way back to the west side of Prim, where I, again, try to finagle my way up to the city without having to cross the mine bridge, but the game was absolutely having none of it. Well, fine, I didn't even want to get in that way, it's cool. I use my dude's inexplicable knowledge at disarming landmines and cross the bridge, and amazingly don't encounter any more convicts on the way inside the V&V. Talk to Johnson to advance I Fought the Law and get the ability to betray Eddie by talking to Lieutenant Hayes, and bam, almost done. Just gotta head back to Goodsprings to wrap things up the way I originally started them. I roll into Goodsprings around sundown and start up Ghost Town gunfight, and I think it was once again appropriately cinematic, and maybe even made more sense narratively for the powder gangers to attack at night. I end up actually using the dynamite and manage to once again save everybody in town, which is nice. And with that, we wrap up another productive day in the Mojave Wasteland, with my plan for a day 3 to begin with participating in the NCR's retake of the prison. But that's going to be it for this part of the Game Vault. Hopefully there should be more episodes on both this and other games coming soon-ish. I am, unfortunately, as usual, still very much struggling, so if you enjoy this content and want to see more, consider supporting me on Patreon using the link below. Either way, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.